We're brought to you today by MM Want to look impeccable at the office but have better things to do than shop for workwear? MM is a women's workwear brand that offers luxurious, pragmatic clothing and personal styling in both straight sizes and plus sizes. Just fill out a quick online survey and one of their discerning stylists will send you a bento box of wardrobe staples, handpicked just for you. Try everything on at home, keep what you like, and send back the rest. It's totally free to try and they're not a subscription service, so there's no commitment. To try a bento yourself, visit MMBento.com. That's MMBENTO.com. And use the code PSYCH, PSYCH at checkout, and MM will donate 10% of profits to global giving. Welcome to Food Psych, a podcast about intuitive eating, health at every size, and body liberation. I'm your host, Christy Harrison, and I'm an anti-diet registered dietitian and certified intuitive eating counselor, offering online courses and programs to help people all over the world make peace with food. Join me here every week as I talk with interesting people from all walks of life about their relationships with food and their bodies.
I remember I was teething, little gums bleeding, cried every evening, it was all about eating. When I became a teen, it was all about beefing. Now I'm ready for the world, trying to sink my teeth in, stacking extra.
Hey there, welcome to episode 136 of Food Psych. I'm your host, Christy Harrison, and if you celebrate Christmas, I want to wish you a Merry one since this episode is happening on Christmas Day. If you don't celebrate Christmas, I hope you get to have today as a relaxing day off and enjoy some self-care, or maybe you're working, and earning some extra cash, which is a form of self-care too. So whatever you get up to today, I hope you're finding peace, and I know this holiday season can be really fraught for anyone with food and body issues, so I'm sending lots of compassion your way. I know how it is, and I'm hoping this episode will help you feel more at peace with food too. Today, I'm talking with Stefani Reinold, a reproductive psychiatrist and mental health advocate who speaks out about eating disorders, body acceptance, and body image in pregnancy and postpartum. We talked about weight stigma in the medical field, how to handle the body image issues that emerge in pregnancy and postpartum, why accepting your body is so hard in appearance-focused environments, her experience in my intuitive eating fundamentals course, because she took the course, and so much more. I can't wait to share our conversation with you in just a moment. But first, I'll answer this week's listener question, which is from a listener named Jen, who writes, so when you finally decide to be done with dieting for good, how do you transition into non-restrictive eating? I've tried a few times, but the minute I find myself gaining any weight, I freak out and go back to restriction. How do you face the fear that you will probably gain some weight after allowing yourself to eat previously forbidden foods? So thanks, Jen, for that great question. And before I answer, just my usual disclaimer that these answers are for informational and educational purposes only and aren't a substitute for individual medical or mental health advice. This is like the $1 million question, right? And I think it comes down to really rooting out the internalized fat phobia in your own mind so that you can accept the weight gain that might happen for many folks when they start to allow themselves to eat previously forbidden foods again and not have that stop you. So one way to do this is to start to surround yourself with examples of people in larger bodies living great lives and being amazing thinkers and speakers and writers and having qualities you admire and lives you admire. So you're already well on your way to doing that by listening to this podcast. And if you haven't listened to all the episodes yet, you can go back and specifically seek out ones that feature people in larger bodies that you admire, that are doing awesome things, and seek out their content as well and dive deeper into the offerings that they have online. In visual media like Instagram, I love unfollowing and unsubscribing. Unfollow people who make you feel triggered or whose images trigger that internalized fat phobia in you, and start following people in larger bodies so that you can start appreciating their beauty and their humanity and start exposing yourself to a different aesthetic than the one that we're constantly bombarded with in diet culture, which is Western culture, right? So really challenge your internalized fat phobia by opening yourself up to images of different larger body sizes and diverse bodies, and work to find acceptance for the bodies that aren't usually celebrated in our culture. So that's one piece of it, right? Is that sort of aesthetic transition. And the other piece that's really, really important here is to reflect on how your own self-worth is tied up with body size and what you think it means to gain weight, the meaning that you've invested into gaining weight, really the meaning that society and diet culture has invested in you, right? It's pretty much downloaded that into your brain. And so figuring out where it is and how to get that out of your brain is an important part of this process. So think about all the messages that you've internalized about larger bodies from our culture, all the ways that you've internalized those messages, and reflect on the fact that these are just messages. They're just things you've been told. They don't actually represent the truth. They're not absolute. They're just beliefs that are circulating in our culture at this point in history, and you can choose to question them and push back against them. So see if you can brainstorm some of these messages and think about the fact that they really are just messages. They're just beliefs circulating in our culture. You can distance yourself from them. And then reflect on how it feels to believe those messages, how it feels to have your self-worth tied up in body size in these ways. Because I think the messages that we're told about weight and body size in our culture pretend to be for our own good, right? It's like, well, you don't want to look like this, so do XYZ. And the chastising message of you don't want to look like this is supposedly to save us from pain. But actually, believing in those messages causes a lot more pain and suffering than it helps. It causes more than it prevents. So think about what it feels like to believe in those messages. Think about the negatives that you're getting from believing in those messages and what you really lose out on in your life by having those beliefs, by accepting those beliefs from our society. What do you want for your life that you're not getting because this self-worth stuff, this body image stuff, this internalized fatphobia stuff is standing in the way? And what would it feel like to change those thoughts, to stop tying your self-worth up in your body size? So really try to imagine it, try to feel the emotions and the physical sensations that come up for you when you do. There might be some anxiety about thinking about this new way of being, but try to remember that this is just a thought experiment, right? This is just a mental exercise. So see if you can let go of that anxiety and just blue sky it, like think big, dream the wildest dream you can about how it would actually feel if you didn't have these beliefs standing in your way. And also think about how it would feel to eat without worrying about how it would supposedly affect your appearance. How do you want to relate to food? And how do you think it might feel to make food choices based on what you actually want, what you want to eat, right? Desire versus how you think the food will make you look, right? How would that be different? How would it feel to eat what you actually want without feeling guilty or ashamed? I feel like that would be really liberating. There's probably some real freedom in that. There's probably also some anxiety tied up in the sense of stepping into a larger freedom. But just try to examine those things and suss out what it would really feel like to you to make food choices that feel more liberating. And then reflect on these things a little bit each day. Make it a practice because it really does take practice to open up to a different way of thinking and a new way of relating to yourself that doesn't just accept the messages that we've gotten from diet culture. I'm always saying diet culture is a life thief, right? It steals your life. It steals your time, your energy, your mental space, your health, your happiness, your money. God knows your money, right? It steals all these things from you. It steals your life. And so reflecting on how it's stolen your life, reflecting on what are the things that it's taken away from you that you really want, that you want to get back, can help you then figure out, okay, how am I going to go about getting these things back? And in your case, it sounds like what you want to get back is a sense of liberation from dieting, a sense of non-restrictive eating, a sense that you're free in making choices with food and able to eat those foods that you had previously forbidden yourself. It sounds like you don't want to have forbidden foods anymore. So really reflect on that. Reflect on why you want that. Reflect on how it would feel if you were actually living in line with those values, and spend a little bit of time cultivating that every day and making that a practice. Because it is really tricky. It's definitely a practice to sort of root out that internalized fat phobia and body shame that's standing in your way right now. But I think if you can give some time to this, these new practices are definitely going to pave the way for more body acceptance. And ultimately, that is going to pave the way to opening up to different kinds of foods and previously forbidden foods without that fear of weight gain that's been standing in your way. And so it might continue to stand in your way for a little while longer, but you can really chip away at that roadblock until it moves. So I hope that helps. I hope that gets you started, and if you want to submit your own question for a chance to have it answered on an upcoming episode, visit christyharrison.com/questions. That's christyharrison.com/questions. Then if you want a whole library of answers from me about the finer points of making peace with food, plus the chance to ask me any question you want and have me answer it in an exclusive monthly Q&A podcast, join my online course, Intuitive Eating Fundamentals. If you're ready to become an intuitive eater and leave diet culture behind once and for all, you can learn more and sign up for the course at christyharrison.com/course. That's christyharrison.com/course. We're brought to you today by Zola, the wedding company that will do anything for love. With over 500 top brands and 50,000 gifts, experiences, and cash funds, Zola Registry has everything you love about your favorite department store, plus things like honeymoon funds, food tours, wine subscriptions, and so much more. It's so easy to use for couples and their guests, plus the friendly customer service team will really go above and beyond, from helping you pick out the perfect blender to walking your grandmother through the registry. And with Zola's top-rated app for iPhone, iPad, and Apple Watch, couples can manage their registries on the go, and over 300,000 couples have. Best of all, your Zola registry automatically integrates into your Zola wedding website, so guests can seamlessly shop and get all the details they need in one place. And I've shared here before that my husband and I have been among that 300,000 couples that have used Zola. We got married this summer at City Hall because we wanted to, avoid the whole wedding industrial complex, but we are throwing a low-key reception for our friends and family this spring, and we chose Zola as our registry because it's so beautifully designed and so easy to use, and it lets people contribute to our honeymoon fund and give us some other gifts and experiences all in one place. To sign up with Zola and receive a $50 credit towards your registry, go to zola.com/psych. That's Zola, ZOLA.com/PSYCH to sign up for a $50 credit towards your registry. We're also brought to you today by Masterclass. Imagine if you could learn to make homemade lobster ravioli from Chef Gordon Ramsay. Now you can with Masterclass. Masterclass produces online courses taught by the best in the world. They have nearly 30 instructors across a wide range of fields, including writing, film, acting, and many others, all beautifully produced and shot with cinematic production quality. They've rounded up an amazing group of chefs to teach their cooking classes, including Thomas Keller, Gordon Ramsay, Alice Waters, and Wolfgang Puck. And mastering the craft of cooking and learning to take pleasure in eating is a huge help in your journey to make peace with food. So I think these classes are an amazing resource. Just in time for the holidays, Masterclass has launched the All Access Pass, a thoughtful gift for the home cooks or lifelong learners in your life. With the new All Access Pass, you can unlock every class from the 4 chefs plus over 30 other masters for the price of 2. Food Psych listeners can get the All Access Pass at masterclass.com/foodpsych. That's all one word, spelled FOODPSYCH. You can learn from the best in the world with Masterclass at masterclass.com/foodpsych. That's masterclass.com/foodpsych. We're also sponsored today by MM Lafleur. For the woman who wants to look impeccable at work, but has better things to do than sift through uninspiring racks of pantsuits, the solution is MM Lafleur. They take the work out of dressing for work by offering luxurious, pragmatic clothing and personal styling in both straight sizes and plus sizes, which is why I love them. Just fill out a quick online survey, and one of their discerning stylists will send you a bento box of wardrobe staples, handpicked just for you based on your preferences and lifestyle. Once your bento arrives, you have 4 days to try everything on. Then keep what you like and send the rest back. You won't be charged anything up front, and you only pay for the items you keep. It's completely free to try, and even shipping is free both ways. Because it's not a subscription service, there's no commitment. To try a bento yourself, visit mmbento.com. That's mmbento.com. And you can use the code PSYCH, PSYCH at checkout, and MM Lafleur will donate 10% of profits to global giving. That's mmbento.com, and you use the code PSYCH at checkout. And now, without any further ado, let's go talk to Stefani Reinold. So tell me about your relationship with food growing up.
So my relationship with food growing up was pretty interesting. When I was very young, food was always in abundance. My dad actually worked in the restaurant industry, and he subsequently owned a couple of restaurants. So I worked in restaurants from like a really young age. We were always in the restaurant. Our family dinners were often spent at the restaurant. So food was always in abundance. I mean, and just great diversity and selection, snacks in my house for plenty. I mean, I think it's my mom's love language to feed us. So food itself was always in abundance for us. And I never remember really thinking much about food at all. That said, I thought a lot about my body. I grew up in Texas, which I think is just by and large a very appearance-oriented kind of area, being in the South. And, the population that I grew up in was just very image-driven. And I was in gymnastics and cheerleading and always these sports that were very aesthetics-driven. And so I think from a very young age, I noticed my body was always on watch. In fact, I think when I was maybe 9 or 10, I already remember adults commenting on like my butt. And I think they maybe meant it as complimentary, but of course I was a child and I just thought, oh, like there's something different about me. Like they're commenting about me and not commenting about other people. But the body was very kind of separate from any issues with food. Because at the time, like I said, like food was in abundance. It wasn't really a problem until probably, I think it was when my dad went into business for himself that my family faced a lot of financial scarcity. And I think that brought in a very scarcity mindset. And it was ironically exactly the same time as I was going into puberty. I think I was 11 or 12 at the time. So my family was under a ton of stress and pressure financially. And, there was a lot of fighting, just a lot of scarcity mindset. It was never a direct issue, but I think food had always been something that my family shared emotions over. So whether we were happy or sad, we ate. So it was a source of enjoyment, but it was also a source of stress. And as I was going into puberty, naturally, I gained weight like every single woman. And I think it was just this cosmic shift of so many things happening in my life, like the stress of my family and my body changing and still also being in gymnastics and my body sort of still being policed by adults and my coaches. And I wanted to be a good gymnast. I wanted to be a good athlete. And I sort of saw it as like the best thing to do to start controlling what I ate. It was probably around that time actually that my practices in gymnastics became longer and longer. So where I was before, I was only in practice for maybe hours at a time. I was now there for like hours at a time.
Was that by your choice or was that because gymnastics just got harder? Like they made you practice more?
Definitely my choice. I mean, I loved it. It was probably where I was the happiest at that time in my life. I mean, I begged my parents to go even more than I was already there. I mean, looking back now, I was maybe probably trying to escape kind of the stress that was in my house at the time, but I was totally myself. I loved gymnastics. It was totally a passion of mine. But I remember, so we would bring snacks throughout our practice. And I think one time, I don't even remember what exactly it was that I brought, but I remember my coach saying something like, that's not going to help you get any higher scores. And so I started to associate like my performance with what I ate. But I think at that time, it was very condescending. And it was like this authoritarian person sort of condescending me. And then this same coach was extremely critical and never encouraging to my performance. So it was just this downward spiral. I mean, I started controlling what I ate. I went on my first diet probably that next summer. And like everybody, when you go on your first diet, I did lose weight and I got tons of encouragement from adults. And they were just, oh, you look so great. It was, I think in summertime too, like I had gone to visit my aunt and had, more tan skin. And I was coming into my own sort of more feminine body. So I had more curves but I was still very physically active. And I had lost weight from this diet. And so I, to the outside world, looked great. So I was getting all of this attention, and not just from really adults, but also from boys. And so it just fed everything that I was like, okay, this is what I'm worth. I'm worth my body. And I can say this now. I mean, this is decades later that I associate this, but at the time I didn't. I did not associate that. I literally equated my self-worth to what I looked like. And I think there were so many intersections to that. I mean, it was the culture that I grew up in, which is very image centric, very Southern. The sports that I played were very aesthetic in nature. And also just kind of the very first time that my body changed, like everything was on, a standstill. Mm-hmm. And it's funny too, because at the time I was always the smart girl. I always kind of had that in my back pocket. I made straight A's. I was very high achieving, like school was fairly easy for me. So the fact that I was getting attention for something other than being smart, it was just amazing because I felt like, oh, this is something that's appropriate. This is something that's socially acceptable. Whereas to be a smart woman is not socially acceptable.
Right.
In at least the environment that I grew up in, it was like, don't make the men around you look dumb, don't speak out of place. Like, all these like subtle subliminal messages that you're fed as a young girl growing up in the South. I think that was what I kind of came to believe, which is nothing like my personality. I'm very outspoken. I'm very stubborn. And so it just totally didn't fit with who I was. So I saw that, okay, if I can change my body and adapt my body, then that's when I'll get real attention and basically unconditional love from society and from others.
And it felt like probably the more kind of acceptable attention for a woman.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Because the most acceptable attention you can get is from a man who then marries you and makes a woman out of you, basically. I mean, and from a very young age, I mean, I definitely had amazing parents, and I have parents that are actually not originally from the South. So I was thankful that my parents, my mom's from the Midwest, my dad's from New Mexico. So I think probably that helped me a little bit because they still encouraged me to do well in school. I mean, in fact, it was, my parents that like drove me to want to be a doctor in the first place. And so they were always extremely supportive and always validating in who I was as a person and as the character of me. But they also always commented on my looks. And, I think they were probably just being what they thought was being a good parent. But when everything around you was also this just like reinforcing the importance of your appearance, and then your parents are also praising you for that, it just fed the monster inside of you, basically. Because I went through, then I went through high school, and so I dropped out of gymnastics by that time, but I was then involved in like show choir and musicals, which is also extremely image centric. And everything's about being the ingenue and being the lead role. And whenever I wouldn't get like that lead role and I'd get like the funny character or like, the fat friend or something, it was just destructive. I mean, it's so funny. It's laughable now, but it truly just ruined me because I felt like the only way I could be important was to be like the lead role and to be like that kind of ideal version of what that lead role sort of should be. So I graduated high school in 3 years because I was really accelerated academically. So I was really driven, and I had an older brother, and I just kind of was done with high school. I sort of just wanted to get out and be on my own. I think I probably left home too soon for me because I was just so incredibly unstable. And that first year of college, I mean, my really chronic dieting and like body obsession had really morphed into a full-blown eating disorder at that point.
What do you think flipped the switch there?
It's really funny. So the first semester of college wasn't too bad. I mean, it was definitely an adjustment, but it wasn't horrible. And I remember, so I went to Baylor, also extremely like Southern. I think it's one of the highest rates of eating disorders actually of all college campuses. And
oh, wow.
It totally makes sense because you go to school, I think the ratio at the time I was there was like 65-35, like women to men. And it's maybe higher, maybe lower now, somewhere around there, but majority women. And these are all women that they look like they're former pageant queens of Texas. I mean, you walk across the Baylor campus and it's just, that's what you see. And I remember my parents would not let me sorority my first year. I don't know why that was even a big deal because I didn't even know what Greek life was. I mean, I didn't come from like some legacy family. Like I didn't come from a pedigree. I mean, my parents are like very middle class, like working people. And so, but when I got to college, it was like everyone that I met in the dorms was joining a sorority. And so I thought, that's what I have to do. And then when I couldn't do it, because I mean, it's extremely expensive. And when your parents don't support you, then obviously I couldn't afford it to do on my own. And I still was petrified of letting my parents down. So I didn't join a sorority. And I remember it was after that I just really felt like I didn't have a place in the world. I felt incredibly left out. I mean, my roommate, she had joined a sorority. All my friends on my wing that I had made that semester had joined a sorority. And they sort of all had their clique. And I was really driven in my studies. But even people in my pre-med classes, a lot of them joined a sorority. So it was like the whole world was coming to an end because I didn't have a community group. Like I really didn't have anybody that I could call like my people, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like a crew to really run around with. It was like everybody that you were hanging out with the first semester was off with other people now.
Totally. And I also maybe had like some guilt and shame that I mean, Baylor was like sort of my backup school. Like I had wanted to go on the East Coast to an Ivy League school, but really didn't have the financial means to afford it. So I think I felt like I was settling already. I mean, I was massive perfectionist at this time, and it just really fed everything about that part of my personality. And then the second semester of my first year, I think I made 2 or 3 Bs. And again, I mean, massive perfectionist here. I, being pre-med, just thought that was like the end of the world. And I remember getting a lot of grief from my dad because it was, just like ridiculous stuff talking about it now after the fact. But in the moment, it was like,
Yeah, that was life. That was everything.
It was because if my identity wasn't in my body, it was in my grades. And so when my grades were not what I wanted them to be and my body didn't look like it wanted it to be, I thought, and I didn't have friends or a community, it was like I didn't know who I was outside of those things. So, I mean, after that, my entire sophomore year of college was just, I socially isolated myself so that, to engage in disordered eating behaviors. And even when people, I think, probably tried to reach out, I just didn't really acknowledge them, or I just didn't know how to even help myself. I think I was really depressed at the time too. I mean, I think like my own mental health was really suffering, and it's kind of hard to tease out like if it was the eating disorder making me depressed or my depression that sort of fed the eating disorder. I mean, it's so intertwined from what I understand clinically now, but it was just not a very good time in my life.
Yeah, it sounds incredibly lonely and isolating and sad. And it sounds like too, maybe you turn to the eating disorder behaviors in part to cope with that loneliness.
Yeah. It's kind of funny because people say you engage in disordered eating to kind of escape, but it was almost in this indirect way, like that's how I wanted to connect. Not that I was going to go talk about it, but it was almost like I really want to connect with people. So this is, and it's a very like unconscious kind of bizarre maladaptive way of thinking, but I was really crying out for help, but I couldn't do it with my words. And so it came out through an effort to try to control my body.
Were other people around you doing that too? Because I know, other people I've talked with, not necessarily for the podcast, although a few, but, more clients and stuff who've been in sororities have said that, disordered eating is rampant and that disordered eating behaviors are sort of taught in sorority life. And so I'm wondering, did you see, the friends that you lived with and stuff engaging in that? And it was a way to try to engage with them or be in, part of their world, or was it something that you just stumbled on yourself?
It's pretty interesting. So my parents wouldn't let me rush my first year. And then I think they maybe saw how miserable I was. And I sort of confided in them like how much really Greek life kind of drove campus life. And so I did actually my next year end up joining a sorority. And at Baylor, there is no Greek life housing. So you kind of just live in your own apartment style houses. And I did not live with girls that were in sorority actually my next year, which probably maybe made the experience better. And I'll say we didn't ever talk about the behaviors, at least not that I really have distinct memories of. Like, in fact, I remember in my head thinking like I was the weird one, that I couldn't even have like a normal meal with someone without wanting to escape or freak out about what I was eating, or, and no one else around me seemed to have that problem. They seemed to be eating, quote, normal eaters. That said, I definitely remember girls who lost a lot of weight and getting tons of attention for it. I remember one girl in particular coming out about her anorexia. Again, she never talked about like specifics, but she actually left campus for a while to get treatment. I knew a few other handful of friends actually that left for a semester to get treatment for eating disorders. I just remember it being like incredibly image-centric environment is the best way I can say it. It was just everything was about, even down to like everything you do was like a theme party and like what costume are you going to choose to wear and like what are you going to wear and what's your hair going to look like? It was just an environment that you wouldn't be caught dead going to class in something like workout clothes. In fact, I remember one of my roommates, I had like a 7:30 a.m. like PE class, I think my sophomore year, and I would just roll out of bed like in my sweatpants and just go. And I remember getting in a fight with her because, sometimes you bicker with roommates, whatever. And one of the things she attacked me with was, well, I don't just roll out of bed and go to class in the morning.
Oh.
So it's just, that's just the environment that, just to put it in a little bit of perspective, like that was your social card was what you looked like and what guy you were dating. And if you were dating so-and-so, and if you had a date to such and such function, and the only way to get a date is to look like a certain ideal body type. And Baylor actually, I think once or twice a year, they had an eating disorders awareness week. And what I do remember, if it didn't come from my friends, those awareness weeks definitely made my eating disorder worse. Now understanding things from a clinical perspective and knowing that eating disorders are very, contagious in nature, quote unquote, it does make perfect sense that if an awareness week is done the wrong way, which it probably was at Baylor at the time, then it can always make kind of the behaviors of an eating disorder, if someone's already suffering from one, worse.
Right. So like not having awareness of triggers and probably saying things that gave you ideas and were like a how-to manual.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it kind of in a weird way, it sort of validated me because I was like, oh, okay, that's what I have. Like, I'll just keep doing what I'm doing. Because this was also sort of the era where it was like, there was no treatment for it, or there's treatment, but there's no cure. And so I just started to believe, I'm just damaged goods. This is just who I am. This is what I'm going to be, and I'm never going to get out of it. And so I just, in a weird way, I just settled in like my disorder, that this is just who I am and this is just how it's going to be. And there's no way out of it.
Wow. Yeah, that's really hard. And did they have a student health center or referrals to psychologists and stuff that you could get? Or was it like there sort of wasn't a sense of there was help available for you?
They did, but I was just so in it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I would have gotten out of it. In fact, to the extent that I think I remember opening up to my parents at one point, and everything came out that they were afraid to get me professional help for fear that it would keep me out of medical school.
Oh my God.
Because it would go on my permanent record and then medical schools wouldn't accept me. And it's just, It's bogus because yes and no. Now, there are certain questions that you have to answer a certain way if you get different kinds of treatment, but it definitely wouldn't have kept me out of medical school. It's just, it's very upsetting. And also, I know that my parents and the adults in my life were probably just really trying to protect me they just didn't know. It was just a lot of ignorance, a lot of misinformation about mental health services out there. And it's really, really sad because I see so many college kids go through the same kind of thing. They are so wrapped up in what kind of job they're going to get, what kind of grad school they're going to go to, what their grades are, how they're performing currently, that they don't understand kind of the ramifications of what's going on.
Yeah, because they can be lifelong. Like if you don't get treatment for it early enough and it sticks around and you descend further into the eating disorder, it can end up being something that really incapacitates your life down the line. And I totally get there's this stigma against mental health in a lot of parts of our society still, even though I think on the whole, mental health is becoming less stigmatized, but there's still a lot of shame a lot of people have about going to a therapist and what that means about them or getting a diagnosis, because that feels like it's going to haunt you forever. So I totally understand that sort of impetus to avoid getting treatment. But it's like, if you're thinking about your future and you're thinking about what's going to affect your career opportunities and stuff like that, actually an eating disorder untreated is going to be a far worse thing. It's going to be a far worse outcome for your future than getting treatment now.
Oh, for sure. For sure. And gosh, at the time when I was pre-med, I remember, and there might have even been more, but I remember 3 suicides when I was a pre-med student at Baylor. And it's awful. It's so awful to think that I mean, it was probably out of guilt or shame that they didn't get the help they needed. And that happens. I mean, people don't realize like complication of a mental illness is suicide and it's death. I mean, these are life-threatening illnesses that we really need to get over the stigma because literally this is killing people.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Not getting help when you need it is just going to exacerbate the condition.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so sad. So how did it go from there then? How did you ultimately recover? Like, was there something that sort of sparked it, or was it a slow process for you?
So I graduated Baylor. I took a year off between undergrad and medical school. I came back home. I actually worked in hospital administration and kind of fundraising arm of healthcare. And I kind of had the college experience that I always wanted in that year. I mean, I let loose. I just dated casually. I went to happy hour. Like I sort of had what I should have had the previous 4 years of my life. And that definitely started to help me just loosen up, like that there's so much more to life than my academic success. And there's, even if I never, because at this time I was just really burned out. Like, do I even want to be a doctor? Because I was floating around the idea of just going into hospital administration because I liked the business side of things. And I think that started to help. And then when I did finally start medical school, everything got better. And I attribute that to lots of things. I think, so I went to medical school in San Antonio. San Antonio, the city, is so much different from Dallas, where I grew up. So Dallas is very materialistic. It's very, I mean, they call it home of the $30,000 millionaire because it's like the people who, make like $30,000 a year, but they're living like these crazy extravagant lives. San Antonio is so much more laid back. It's kind of like San Diego, it's just like it's influenced more by Latin culture. So it's a much slower paced city, so the city itself was an amazing change of pace for me. And the people in my medical school class are just amazing people. I had the absolute best time. I made the best friends of my life. I mean, I think I finally was in the midst of people that cared more about something than their bodies. Like we were all there, like doing good work. I mean, and for the most part, doctors become doctors to help people. And for the most part, I mean, most people that go into medicine, at least while they're in medical school before they get jaded or cynical through training. But when you enter medical school, you're with people that are very humanitarian in nature. I mean, most of these people did a lot of volunteer work in undergrad. They worked really hard. They forsaked whatever, a lot of frivolous stuff, if you will, in their past to get to where they are now, really for the end result of like helping people. I mean, if you're just in it for the money, you go the business route, you go the entrepreneurial route, you do something else, you go to technology or engineering. I mean, truly, people that initially enter the field of medicine, I think just really love people, at least initially. And so I met some of the most amazing people and I really had great role models. I met my husband. I think that had played a lot of role in my recovery, meeting someone that really fully unconditionally accepted me exactly who I was.
Yeah, that means a lot. That's huge.
It is huge. And, it's funny because I kind of fought it for a while. I was like, this is stupid. Like, why do I feel better about my body just because the guy I'm dating feels fine about my body? But it really is so powerful. I mean, for whatever reason, we are very driven by how other people see us. And when someone that we care about cares about us just as much as we care about them, it really can be a very healing process.
Totally. Especially that unconditional acceptance part. Like, because I think with disordered eating and diet culture, like we lose unconditional acceptance for ourselves, right? We're putting so many conditions on our ability to accept ourselves. It's like only if I'm a certain size or only if I eat a certain way or only if X, Y, and Z can I truly accept myself and sort of let down my guard. And so if someone else can model that for us and like give us that acceptance, that unconditional acceptance that we are really craving, that we all need and deserve, but like aren't giving to ourselves and are sort of, I think in the depths of diet culture and disordered eating too, people can almost become like repellent to that stuff. Like it's like water off a duck's back. They don't really take it in or feel it. I know for me, like I had people in my life when I was in my disordered eating days, I had people in my life who did unconditionally accept me and value me for more than my body. But I was just like, yeah, that's nice. It wasn't sinking in. But I think with a romantic relationship with someone that you spend that much time with and whose opinion you really value, having them model that unconditional acceptance to you, it's like hard to look away from, it's hard to escape. And so eventually it's going to sink in a little bit, or it's going to do something to your self-image.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it honestly, even just the logistics of spending so much time with one person, I mean, you can't really get away from anything, like they're going to see it. So I think it was this really built-in accountability because without, it took actually a couple years before I ever opened up about my past with my now husband, which, of course he embraced it and loved me all the same. But I think I was so petrified to share that part of myself with him, even that I just got over it. I mean, in a weird way, it was like I valued my time I spent with him more than my eating disorder behaviors.
Yeah, I feel that too. I mean, I've shared on the podcast before that I had a boyfriend in my early 20s who was sort of that first step out of the depths of disordered eating for me. And that relationship ultimately didn't last, but like he was a foodie and he was really into food adventures. And I wanted to impress him so much, which is obviously why the relationship didn't last, because it was just about impressing him and not about like being my true self. And I sort of ultimately couldn't do that. But like I did want to impress him so much that I sort of was forced to put away the really disordered stuff, at least for when we weren't together, and just engage in pleasure around food when we were together. And then we started spending more and more and more time together to where the time that I was by myself was so limited that was like, okay, well, I guess I don't do that stuff anymore.
Yeah.
And of course, when we broke up, a lot of it sort of came back in various other ways. It never was as bad as it had been before we were dating, but like it, disordered eating sort of morphs and twists and takes different shapes. So it wasn't like it just left. But I think it did help sort of start me on the road to recovery and get me out of those deep depths of disordered eating. And that sort of like codependency and desire to impress someone so much that you hide parts of yourself probably isn't great for a relationship, but it's damn helpful if it happens to coincide with, helping you get out of the worst parts of the eating disorder. So I'm grateful for that anyway.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's kind of funny sort of just recollecting that because I think both my husband was the catalyst for improving my relationship with food initially, but in recent years was also the catalyst for driving me back to disordered eating. So, I mean, exactly what you said. I mean, when you are reliant on sort of one person's opinion, which again, I didn't think that I was. I mean, I thought I was over it. And, we subsequently got married. I had our first baby. And even after my first daughter, I mean, I definitely remember being ultra conscientious of my body through that pregnancy. But, it was a good time in my life. I remember pregnancy being really protective and it was exciting. And after my first baby, things were fairly easy on the postpartum front. I mean, I experienced postpartum depression, but that was sort of unrelated to my body at that time, at least. But it wasn't until my husband and I actually were geographically separated. He's in the Army, so he sort of moved on while I was finishing my psychiatry residency in DC. So I was sort of left with my daughter. I had just had a miscarriage. We had been trying to conceive another child. And I just became, I think because my body was failing me, maybe because I had a miscarriage and like I couldn't plan a pregnancy and, being away from my husband, which was sort of like my stability at the time, it just really unraveled me. And I did subsequently get pregnant. And that entire pregnancy was just fueled with immense amount of perseveration on my body. I was petrified of gaining weight. In fact, to the extent that actually I was losing weight and the doctor was very concerned because my baby wasn't growing. I was restricting my food. So I began seeing a high-risk doctor when I was about 20 along. And it was funny because, and this was after some minced words were said between me and my husband. And I think it sort of just drove me to seek control in the only way that I felt I could control, which was my body. But sadly, I was pregnant, which if you didn't have control of your body when you're not pregnant, you definitely don't have control of your body when you are pregnant.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of biological stuff that takes over, right? It's not within your conscious control.
Exactly. It was just a very dark time in my life. In fact, I think one of the very first appointments with the high-risk doctor, I had my husband come because I wanted him to hear it from her that I needed to gain weight, basically, because I was so petrified that he was going to leave me if I looked a certain way. And we have since sort of healed that part of our relationship, and I don't want to throw him under the bus, but it was very painful given my history that sort of the one person that at one point in my life unconditionally loved me was also the one person that sort of drove me back to a really horrible emotional feeling. And, the doctor told my husband, you need to be eating this many more calories than you're already eating, and which was pretty much double what I was eating, which completely petrified me. And it was about this time that I think I ran across Intuitive Eating, the book. And it's funny because I actually owned the book before, but I literally found it in my drawer next to my bed kind of around this time. And I have no idea how I bought it the first time, but I never read it. I mean, it just sat in my drawer.
I feel like that's such a common thing for people. Actually, I've heard a lot of people say that
really?
That and I even had that experience too. I bought the book when I was in the process of researching a book of my own that I subsequently didn't end up writing, but sort of became the basis for the podcast. But I bought it, read parts of it, sort of set it aside, didn't read the whole thing or think about how it applied to me and my eating and relationship with food until 6 months or a year later, I think. So it's just funny how that book just finds you when you're meant to find it.
It does. What is that Buddhist saying? It's when you're ready to learn, a teacher will find you.
Yeah. When the student is ready, the teacher will appear or something like that.
Yeah. But I mean, it was exactly like that because I was so lost. I mean, technically, I would say the actual behaviors of my disordered eating were definitely at its height in college, but this was probably the lowest I'd ever felt in terms of I completely hated my body. I felt like I had just sort of failed and I felt totally unloved. And it really brought me back kind of to this childhood feeling where all I really was good for was my body. And that basically if I didn't look or appear a certain way or please my husband in a certain physical way, that I was going to lose him and then I'd be alone. And that's what we don't want. So it was really painful. But I remember reading this book and I think I read the whole thing start to finish in probably a day or two. And I just kept reading. I don't know. It just was the right time and it just all made sense and it just clicked in that moment. And I came across so many different blogs. I mean, I think I came across Isabel Fox and Duke at the time, and I just loved her stuff. I was like, this all makes sense. This just makes sense. Why did it take so long for you to figure it out? And I'd like to say that everything is just unicorns and rainbows there on out. And I will say after that, it was probably the most consistently upswing of my recovery. So you know how everyone says, recovery is more like this messy little mess and then an arrow at the end.
Right.
I definitely felt that way before reading Intuitive Eating and probably since then. So that was a couple of years ago now, I think about 2 years ago at this point. And it's probably been definitely more incrementally upswing than ever before in my life. I just really credit it to, right time, right information, right place in my life, I guess, because I sort of saw no other way out. And I think the fact I had a daughter, I don't know if that had something to do with it too, but she was becoming of age. So she was 3 at this time, I think. So she was starting to ask me questions and talk about her body. And I just looked at her and I think it just clicked. I do not want my daughter to end up like this. I will do anything to fix my own shit so that she doesn't have to deal with this. Because I think parents and especially mothers to daughters really have such a powerful influence on how they view their body. And I was like, if I don't figure this out now, my daughter's gonna be damaged for life. Like I was sort of damaged for what I thought was my life. And it's taken me so long to untangle this that I don't want my daughter to ever have that. So after probably a few months, I think is when I came across your podcast. And again, I think I just totally binged on everything. And and I was just like, oh my gosh, these are my people. Yes, yes. Like every episode was just like, this is what I need. This is what I need. And, I came across then subsequently other people that have definitely helped my recovery. Julie Duffy Dillon and Lindsay Stunovic and, a lot of guests that you've had on the podcast and just really some amazing people that I now consider colleagues and friends that have sort of been there through me. And I bought your course probably around this time. I think it was maybe over a year ago now, I think.
Yeah. I think you were one of the first cohort.
Yeah. And honestly, if anything else, the community was just amazing. It really is like a great community of people. I mean, the most encouraging and just like I could say anything and it was like, yes, we get you. I'm like, really? But I thought I was crazy. But
right.
And I think really, and I will be very blunt with listeners out there. When I first bought your program, I was definitely still in the, if I master intuitive eating, I will lose weight and everything will be better. So if that is your feeling, totally normal and it's totally okay. That said, I will be very blunt. I have not lost weight and it's not even an issue. So it's so challenging, so challenging. Amber, I think maybe one of the early people in your program, and I think maybe she actually subsequently left the program because I could tell even in my very limited frame of reference at the time, she was very steeped in diet mentality. And I think really just maybe not at the level that she could really internalize what you were practicing or teaching. And I have so much compassion for that because not too long before you, I was obsessed about gluten and paleo. And, I definitely drank all that Kool-Aid. I'll say I probably never completely got as into it as maybe I could have in sort of my early days of like college or, my early 20s. Because I think maybe I still at some level recognized it seems kind of stupid. I, at some point early on in my 20s, recognized that there's so much more to life than food and your body. And I don't want that to be a part of my life. And I will say my family has always consistently been a very foodie family, so they continually reinforced a very positive relationship with food. So even though there were a lot of other issues that, I could blame them for, anytime I went home for the holidays, they still to this day cook a big, huge meal and there's tons of variety. And my dad never once commented on my mom's body. Both my parents are in larger bodies. And I think honestly, doing this work has actually probably made me accept my parents to a much stronger degree than ever before. Because I think growing up, I sort of fed into all the lies like, oh, I wish my parents would just lose weight. I wish my parents would just lose weight. And, even going through like pre-med and medical school, it was like, oh, I wish my parents would just lose weight. And I just kind of kick myself now because I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so sad that I felt that way. My parents are fine and they have health problems, but honestly, it is so little to do with the food that they're eating.
Mm-hmm. And pretty much everyone of any size has some health problems, right? It's like nobody has a clean bill of health completely. Like we all have something.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, so my dad in particular, just talk about like healthcare for larger bodies. I mean, he was so petrified to go to the doctor for years because again, every time he went to the doctor, the only conversation the doctor wanted to have with him was, why don't you just lose some weight? Why don't you just lose some weight? And so he just stopped going and he's, a stubborn man. Like, I'm not saying that's the right thing to do, but I understand now a little bit more what he went through kind of with the new lens that I have of health at every size and intuitive eating, because my dad a few days before I had my daughter, almost 5 years ago, he had a stroke and should have never had a stroke. I mean, it was, I think, just a consequence of him neglecting his medical care because he was petrified to see the doctor for so many years. And it's heartbreaking to me because, I mean, still to this day, he doesn't like going to the doctor, but I think he now sees like he has to. And as my mom pretty much makes sure that he does go. But it's heartbreaking to me because I see patients every day that tell me these horrible stories of what doctors tell them. And I honestly wouldn't believe it until I believe it. You know, it's like I have never actually seen one of my colleagues say these kinds of things, but I would definitely believe it. I mean, I had a patient just recently. So part of my job, I do inpatient work at a hospital. And so I definitely see all the problems in the hospital system at large.
Yeah. There's so much weight bias in that system.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. It's awful. And I will say in some ways, the psychiatric world is somewhat removed because usually behavioral health units are just, you know, we don't have to go by like, if their BMI is above this, we have to order these labs kind of thing. Like, I mean, that's what happens on medical floors. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah. I know these guidelines are like entrenched in hospitals, right? So it's like, even if an individual doctor might not think to ask about that or be interested in that or have any sort of desire to talk about someone's weight, that is literally what they're required to do.
It is. No, it's awful. It is so awful because that is how the hospital gets all of their value-based care points. And I mean,
right, because you can bill insurance, right? It's another thing, like another diagnosis to add on to the insurance code so that insurance pays you more money for like quote unquote obesity counseling.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Don't even, oh my gosh.
You know, when I was in private practice as a dietitian and I would bill insurance because I took insurance for a while, I refused. I like wouldn't put that on there, even though I could have made a lot more money probably if I had added that code on. It was just like, I refuse. I won't do this because it's terrible. It's dehumanizing.
It's incredibly terrible. I mean, I have so much to say on this topic. I don't even know what direction I want to go in, but I will speak from my personal experience. So actually just recently, this is really funny. I'm kind of glad it happened before this interview because I wouldn't have this story to tell, but I am a fairly healthy person in the sense I take like one pill a day for something otherwise, but I am able-bodied. Like I have a lot of privilege in my health. But one day I randomly woke up in the middle of the night, this was 2 weeks ago, and had excruciating abdominal pain in like worse than childbirth, worst pain of my life. I had no idea what was happening to me. I literally almost passed out from the pain. Didn't even know that was possible. My husband had to practically carry me to the car, woke my kids up. We got, a couple blocks down the road to the emergency room. I waited in the hospital for like hours before they really figured out what was wrong with me. They finally figured out it was my gallbladder. So I'm admitted to the hospital. The surgeon that I had, I swear this is like God's joke on me or something. He's a bariatric surgeon by training.
Oh, God.
Yes. And the first thing he wants to talk to me about is, so have you had any problems with your gallbladder? I'm like, no, I've never had any problems with my gallbladder before. He's like, oh, has anyone in your family had any problems with your gallbladder? I said, I don't know. I mean, maybe my mom has. His first question right after that was, oh, is she heavy?
Oh, God.
Really? Okay. Then he proceeds to basically talk to me about why he wants to have me in his practice, helping with these obese patients of his. I was so miffed. Honestly, had I not been in so much pain, I probably would have totally gone off on him because I already just had this massive bias that what he was doing was completely evil. And I was just, it was just so incredibly frustrating for me to see like everything he talked about. And he started talking to me about his practice and about his patients, like how many quote issues they have. And I'm just oh my gosh, this man is so disillusioned.
And so weight biased.
So weight biased. It is literally his job. I mean, literally his job is to find fat people and convince them they have a problem to give them, I think Julie Duffy Dillon calls it stomach amputation.
Mm-hmm.
It so is. And I was so upset. So when he left the room, I remember my husband looking at me, he's like, what got you so upset? And so I had to explain to him, like, you don't understand, like this procedure, first of all, it doesn't even cause weight loss. All of the research about bariatric surgery does not hold up that it even causes permanent weight loss. So first of all the bearing that is what it says it's going to bring about does not happen. And if anything, it just causes so many more issues, like nutritional deficiencies, digestive problems for life. They have psychiatric issues. I mean, it's just
it's barbaric.
It's awful. It's awful. And I mean, it was just so upsetting because as he's taking my history, he's basically judging my parents because I have to share, my family history of other medical problems. And his question is, when he hears about the medical problems that my parents have, he's like, oh, are they both heavy? And I'm just like, okay, and what does this have to do with taking care of me and my problem right now?
Seriously. Yeah, it's like, let's shame Stefani's parents hour here. Like,
exactly. I mean, it was just so absurd. So, I mean, first of all, I have so much compassion for people that are in larger bodies and already would probably be shamed. But you're shaming my family, and you're essentially shaming me for being a product of them, because he then proceeds to counsel me on how to prevent all the problems that my parents have. So,
oh my God.
Yeah, I mean, it's just horrendous. I mean, and I had a patient just recently, she told me, so she was extremely sick. I mean, to the point that she had gone off her medications. She was in a severe depressive episode to the point that she was suicidal. She went to her primary care doctor, which was the first doctor that she could get in to see.
Most people, I think, right? It's like usually the first line of defense.
Exactly. I mean, I think primary care doctors probably prescribe 80% of antidepressants in the United States because there's such a shortage of psychiatrists.
Right.
But she told me that in that same visit, the doctor called her fat, told her she needed to lose weight.
Oh, God. When she's here for suicidality and depression.
Yes. So, needless to say, days later, she ended up in the hospital because obviously the thoughts just got worse. And after really kind of an extensive history taking, what we actually came to find out was her primary problem actually wasn't even depression. It was an eating disorder. So she was like, this is the first person I've ever told about all of this. And ironically, she was actually not fat. Even in the realm of whatever medical definitions there are, she was, of a very average, I don't even know what her BMI was because I don't look at that, but she did not appear outside of average, if you will.
Right. The normal quote unquote BMI category.
Whatever that means, right? But so I found it already pretty ironic that this doctor was really fat shaming someone that was not even actually fat in the first place, but that's a whole other issue.
Right.
And when you took a better history of this patient, she was definitively anorexic. I mean, she had severe restricting behaviors of food, and she had a history of bulimia, and her reasons for restricting currently was because she was afraid of going out of control and returning back to her bulimic behaviors. So had you only taken maybe a slightly better history and had a little better social skills, you probably would have gotten her the help that she needed.
And avoided triggering her with that fat shaming rhetoric that has no place in medical care anyway, but especially with someone who's struggling with an eating disorder can be extremely harmful.
Oh my gosh. It's just hearing these kinds of stories from my patients is just... it's so heartbreaking because, I'm one person in a very large, broken medical system. And there are so many misinformed colleagues of mine and people, sadly, that I think are actually thinking they're doing goodwill for the world, which probably kind of breaks my heart even more that they're actually thinking they're on this health crusade and that they're really helping people be, quote, healthy. And they're really misinformed. I mean, the research doesn't hold up. They haven't read the facts, but we're not exposed to the facts. I mean, that's the thing. It's this is sort of an underground movement of information out there, although it's not really underground, but
it's not taught in medical school probably, right? This is not something you would get in your training.
No, in fact, so I was in a dual degree program. I got my MD and my MPH when I was in medical school. And so I had a rather unique experience in public health. And I think you spoke about it recently, actually, in one of your recent interviews. I think it was with Kai or something about your public health. But I mean, I equate that to very similar to what people say about their dietetics program. I mean, it was incredibly incredibly weight bias. I feel like, in fact, I think one of my colleagues in my cohort laughed that our whole public health degree could be summed up in obesity is bad. Let's stop people from getting fat.
Oh, so true.
But honestly, it's so true. It was like every single class, the biggest problem, the biggest pandemic of issues was the overwhelming obesity crisis, whether it was childhood obesity, adult obesity. And it's like, how do we get them to eat healthier? How do we get them to do this better? As if behaviors would even change the quote obesity problem.
And as though that hasn't been tried before, like for like centuries, as though that wasn't the thing that people already had thought of. Like, I did my master's of public health nutrition. It was like a specific public health nutrition concentration. So yeah, there was a lot about the quote unquote obesity epidemic. And that was sort of the like main focus of this program. And thankfully I had a professor who introduced the idea of social determinants of health, another professor who introduced the idea of environmental determinants of health and things outside of food and nutrition and movement that could be affecting people's health. So like those were some helpful seeds to have planted to be like, wait a minute, maybe the whole thing is not just about people quote unquote eating the wrong foods and having quote unquote obesity. Like, so thank God that started to sort of turn my attention elsewhere, but it was still overwhelmingly weight biased in that program. And same with, the dietitian degree was just like a whole other level of weight bias. Most professors there were like dripping in weight bias and thinking they were doing the right thing too, and thinking that they were helping, which is like just so much harder even now to sort of conscience, because it's like, these are people who want to do good, and yet they're harming people with their lack of knowledge and awareness about how weight stigma literally kills, and perpetuating weight stigma in a way that is just going to hurt people's health and drive the real public health crisis that we're in, which is a fear of fatness and like cultural fat phobia writ large, right? And disordered eating writ large. That's the real public health crisis. And weight stigma from medical providers and from professors and people training in these programs is only going to make that worse.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of funny. I wish I could go back now and see medical school through the lens that I have now, because it's kind of hard for me to look back, because I was so in it when I was there that I don't even know what, like, I can't really consciously say, yes, they're so weight stigmatizing, because my public health, yes, definitively yes. Medical school in general, I actually probably say it was a little more balanced than normal. But that said, I know that just weight stigma is so prevalent among doctors and among healthcare professionals that it would definitely make sense that the people educating us are probably equally very weight stigmatized. So the education you're getting is going to be from a very biased slant.
Mm-hmm. And oftentimes I think it's just in the water. People don't question it. And so it sort of passes without comment. Like I've realized recently, some of the books that I've read in my own recovery from disordered eating that I found really helpful and that, I was recommending to clients when I started doing this work, I've gone back and read them, or people have mentioned to me like, oh, there's some anti-fat stuff in this book. And I was like, oh my God, really? Like I have no memory of that because thin privilege, like that, that stuff I never really had to notice it, right? Because I had the privilege of not noticing it. But B, also, I was so in it when I read those books that it just went right over my head. So yeah, I think it's everywhere.
Well, and it's unfortunate in the mental health world too, because both our diseases that we treat can lead to changes in body composition, as well as the medications we use to treat mental illness often lead to changes in your body composition. So it's such a sticky subject with patients of mine who are extremely fat phobic and petrified of gaining weight. And so instead of truly getting help that they need for their mental illness, they would rather be in their mental illness than be fat, basically.
That's really hard.
It's awful. What was the book? Body of Truth, I think. It came out recently. And she spoke about finally accepting taking, I think, antidepressants or something for her anxiety, and that she stayed at a higher weight when she was on those medications. But she finally came to accept that that was better for her overall health. When we're really considering holistic health, mental health is a huge, huge part of that.
Yes.
And if I can give a schizophrenic homeless patient a medication that, yes, indeed, will probably make them gain weight, but they're able to care for themselves, take care of themselves in, apartment or subsidized housing or something, and actually feed themselves and bathe themselves and be much more higher functioning, I'm okay if they gain the weight.
Right.
And it's just so messed up, the world we live in, that they're like, oh, but he's going to gain weight. I'm like, so wait, let me get this straight. You would rather this man continue to literally drink himself to death on the side of the road and live in abject poverty and not be able to really care for himself and be the victimization of probably multiple crimes throughout a day and the trauma that he's facing, because psychiatric patients are actually 10 times more likely to be the victim of a crime than to be the criminal, than to just have him gain weight and be on the medication that he needs to be on.
Seriously, what is that saying? Like the value
Really?
we place on body size versus all of these other aspects of quality of life. Like, wow, that is mind-blowing.
It's really horrendous. I mean, probably that's an easier argument to make, though. I mean, obviously, I'm making a very extreme argument. Probably what's more challenging is the more higher functioning, bipolar patient or depressed patient who needs a medication that does cause some weight gain or does not cause weight loss, if you will, which is, I mean, that's a whole other thing too, because oftentimes when patients are very depressed, they're not eating appropriately. And so when they're on a medication that's helping their depression, they will naturally begin to eat more, or their appetite increases because the depression is lifting, which then subsequently may lead to weight gain, but it's not from the medication side effect directly. It's actually just because you're not depressed and starving yourself anymore.
Right. That's interesting.
Yeah. And so, I mean, a really heady conversation I have to have with patients. And honestly, it usually takes multiple conversations for them to maybe open their mind to the idea that, yes, medication improves their life. I mean, not to mention the overarching stigma of taking psychiatric medications in the first place. I mean, that's the biggest barrier I face altogether, is that, yes, maybe you actually need medication in the first place, because most people have this very biased impression that I'm weak if I take medication, or I can fix myself, or, if I was only stronger, then I wouldn't have this issue, kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, that's another way that bias against mental health shows up in our world today. It's like, oh, I don't want to just take a pill. Or I see a lot too, people being like, well, I should do the natural route, quote unquote. And,
oh my gosh,
which is like, I mean, I was just talking to someone the other day about this, how there's side effects to everything, right? And Alan Levinovitz brought that up in his episode, and I talk about it now all the time, about how like we really need to make people aware of the side effects of this supposed natural, quote unquote, way of dealing with things, because it doesn't have zero side effects. It actually has some really detrimental side effects, including disordered eating, potentially exacerbating an underlying propensity towards an eating disorder and descending into a really dark place with your mental health, because you thought that going the quote unquote natural route was the better approach, because you weren't made aware of the side effects of the potential pitfalls of doing it that way, rather than like, okay, yeah, medication also has potential side effects, and those are much more commonly disclosed. But, doing it through quote unquote diet and exercise doesn't have zero ramifications either. And in fact, one of the huge ramifications of it is this tendency towards disordered eating. I
mean, it's such an interesting point that you bring up, and it's something I really wanted to mention. So I'm glad you brought it up, that this idea of the demonization of the medical field, almost, that if you're the pure person, or, the clean person, that you don't even need to see a doctor, or,
right.
And it's sort of, I think there's probably lots of reasons for it. I mean, I think we addressed them. I mean, I think seeing a doctor can be very traumatizing, and doctors are by nature going to bring up all the resistance and biases you have toward authoritarian figures, because that kind of relationship lends itself to bring up any issues you have with the authority, basically, because it's a very paternalistic environment as it stands now. And so I think for that reason, people want to avoid doctors because they don't want to be shamed. They don't want to be judged. They have issues with authority. But instead, it's now been like, oh, the right way to go is the healthy way to go. And the healthy way to go is like the juice cleanse and the natural way and the supplements. But yeah, you bring up a great point. It's like those things are not without issues. I see patients in my psychiatric unit that they just took a supplement and it made them very psychotic and hearing voices. I mean, these things are not without side effects because I see the aftermath of it.
Right. Yeah, herbs definitely have their own effects and side effects, and like thinking that you can just take an herbal supplement and that'll be totally fine because it's natural is actually not true. And yeah, same with like the juice cleanses and the quote unquote clean eating movement and stuff. Like, I mean, I've definitely seen people who had malnutrition from what they thought was clean eating because they were doing this natural thing that was supposed to be really good for their bodies and ended up having their bodies eat themselves, basically, and having, sometimes like drinking too much water so that they're essentially drowning their bodies and not having enough sodium to pump their heart. Like really, it's really dangerous actually to try to take your health into your own hands in the way that now diet culture is telling us to do, because diet culture has this new manifestation in this day and age, which is the quote unquote natural health movement and the clean eating world. And like that is an arm of diet culture. That's a tentacle of diet culture. And we have to recognize it as such rather than saying like, oh, this is safe. This is the natural way. This is the way that's going to heal me. Like I'm going to use food as medicine. Like, no, I think the food as medicine approach is really fraught and problematic and can cause a lot more harm than good, actually.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think, who was it? Emily Fonsbeck talks about that a lot. It's so true because I see it all the time. In fact, a lot of times it's funny because everyone talks about gut health. And I mean, okay, gut health like evens itself out when you just eat a normal, diverse amount of foods. This idea that we need to take all these extra probiotic and prebiotic and these like in a supplement form kind of defeats the purpose. I mean, without getting really technical about it, I mean, I actually had a supervisor that even acknowledged this, that people who end up on these kind of cleanses actually do more harm to their gut health and actually bring in even worse bacteria to their colon. So if you're at all thinking about doing that, don't do it.
Such a good thing. Actually, that's a public service announcement for this time of year, because this is going to run around the holidays and you can be sure people are going to be getting this kind of, pressure to do cleanses and reset your gut for 2018 or whatever, right? No, you don't need that.
No. I mean, gosh, I say this with love because I have been there. I've tried the resets. I've tried the detoxes. I bought into the whole 30, whatever all those things are now. And, it's a paradox. The paradox is the less you actually care about your body and all of this stuff and your food, the healthier you actually end up being and the more diverse your food choices end up. And I remember specifically to sort of bring this all together in I guess it's the first module of your program where it's like the assessment. And I think one of the questions, it's been a while since I've looked at it, but I think one of the questions is like, do I naturally choose like a wide variety of foods or something like that? And I vividly remember that question sticking out to me because when I first took it, again, this was in a mindset where I was sort of kind of one foot still in diet culture, one foot like, I know that it doesn't work, but maybe I still want to change my body, blah, blah, blah. So this was kind of my Hail Mary to like figure out my life at the time. But I remember that question specifically because I remember thinking, how is that even possible? How is that possible? Like, how is it going to be possible that I can eat whatever I want, but it will naturally be a wide variety of foods? Because at the time I was still restricting behavior-wise and psychologically. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, I'm just going to binge on brownies and bread and all the gluten in the world.
Yeah, all the gluten. It's going to come flooding back. Yeah.
And I was like, there's no way in the world I'm ever going to crave a salad again. I mean, there's no way that I'm going to want to eat quote unquote healthy foods. I mean, I just was like, there's no way. Like, there's no way I can be like a normal eater. And so please just know if that's you, I think it's incredibly normal. I really think that is how most people think.
Yeah.
And it's incredibly a process. It truly, truly is a process. And I swear, if you would have asked me a year ago, like if the honeymoon phase ever ended, I would have been like, no way, it's never going to end. But, now that I'm not in it anymore and I actually see like life in full array of colors now, it does end actually. And you probably will crave a salad again at one point in your life or not.
Right. Or vegetables of some kind or whatever, right?
Or whatever. But even so, your life is not dictated on like meeting a certain number of food groups in a day and filling the checkbox of what you're allowed in a day.
Right. Right. I know that's such a great thing to point out. And I think it's true. Like people really, when they first think about intuitive eating, they think, oh my God, that it just means that I'm only going to eat brownies for the rest of my life. Like there's never going to be anything else because that's all I want. Like that's all if I am allowed to eat what I want, that's all I'm going to want. But actually, when you really open up to all foods, when you really take the stigma off all foods, it becomes a lot more diverse by nature because you're not just reacting to restriction anymore. You're able to have a more diverse range of what you want to eat. And the things that you told yourself you should eat before because they were quote unquote healthy, and the things you told yourself you quote unquote shouldn't eat before because they were bad or unhealthy start to equalize. Like the seesaw starts to sort of even out so that all these foods are pretty much on the same plane and you can have some brownies and some cake and some veggies and some salad and like it's all neutral. It's all morally neutral. And I think too, I've experienced this. I don't know if you've had this experience yet, but when I was restricting and depriving myself and telling myself, here are all these foods that I should eat. And then I started intuitive eating. I certainly had that honeymoon phase of like going for all the ones that had been off limits, feeling guilty about it. Yes, but like sort of avoiding the foods that I had told myself I should eat. And then there was a phase of coming back into like, oh, actually, I kind of like those foods. And actually, I can also eat those foods in a way that's pretty chill and not as intense as I was eating them before. Like I don't have to make the entire basis of my meal vegetables, but I can have vegetables in like a one pot dish that's like really rich and full of flavor and full of diverse textures and colors and stuff. And like that makes the food more delicious. And that's part of the recipe because especially I find with like different kinds of ethnic cuisines, vegetables are just sort of part of the equation and they're part of what makes the dish really delicious, but it's not like, and there's your vegetable and you have it as a part, however much of your plate, right? It's like not a thing. It's not something you have to obsess about. It's just like, oh, that's part of this dish. There's peppers in that. Great. And it's yummy. Like done.
Right. I mean, and probably the most beautiful thing about all of this is a couple of years ago, when I got into intuitive eating and I started your course, and it was at the time my husband was very into the bodybuilding scene. And I think I had sort of equated, he got very into it. So by nature, it fed into our relationship. And, a lot of people have spoken about that particular world and it's so destructive. But the most beautiful thing is that my husband is like a normal eater now. And I honestly never thought I'd see it really. We used to have fights over like who finished the last Greek yogurt. And legit, there was such a scarcity mindset about things like ice cream in the house and, these, forbidden foods. And now, we have 2 small kids and we keep a wide array of foods in our house. And yeah, some days we eat the whole thing of ice cream, but you know what? We just go buy somewhere the next day. Some days it doesn't get eaten for a whole week. Some days my kids, all they want to eat is one select food for the entire day. And, it's just, that's life. And this whole idea of like balanced eating, I have very mixed feelings on that because different people I think can coach that concept a little bit better than others. I think Jesse Haggerty and maybe Emily Fonsbeck do a pretty decent job of talking about it in a healthy way. But honestly, I think in early stages, it's more destructive than anything to try to find this balance of your eating. For me, at least, I think it really just kept driving me back to the idea Whole30 and bodybuilding, and I kept kind of looking at my plate literally and thinking I had to have this balance. And so when I sort of got rid of that was maybe when kind of the magic happened.
Yeah, I really find that too. And I've stopped talking publicly about nutrition or writing about nutrition in a way that's even like the gentle nutrition way that I do it now. I still don't want to present that out there for people who might be at a stage where even that is problematic.
Yeah.
And I think that really like the people that I coach and work with and the people in my courses now, I structure it in such a way that nutrition's at the end always for a reason. And even when people in the one-on-one coaching I do bring up nutrition early on, I'm like, okay, let's talk about why you want to talk about this, but let's also sidebar the actual discussion of nutrition other than maybe some like myth busting that we can do now. But like, let's sidebar the talk about what might be beneficial for you nutrition wise until later in the process, once you've actually broken down the good and bad foods and the, challenge the food police and all this stuff that like has to come first before you can relate to nutrition in a way that's truly balanced. And balanced meaning not perfectionistic about what's on your plate every single meal and snack, but balanced in sort of like the sense that you were talking about, where it sort of just evens out over time, where it's like, yeah, some days your kid's going to want to eat cereal every second of the day and that's all they eat. And there won't be a green thing in sight. And then other days, maybe they're going to really be excited about broccoli and, it's all going to kind of come out in the wash. So don't worry about it.
Right.
Yeah. So it's like, I think balance over time instead of balance in a given day is what I would advocate now. And you don't even have to pursue it. It just finds you. Like it's something that when you're practicing the other principles of intuitive eating, it just sort of comes naturally. And I feel like the people that get to that place in the course or in my programs where they're thinking and talking about nutrition finally after all this other stuff are like, oh yeah, this is just kind of what I've already intuited and already gleaned from the other principles and from sort of tuning in and noticing what's going on for myself all along the way. Like I don't actually have to think that hard about it. So I think all of it just points to like, let's just think less hard about food and nutrition altogether. And let's just think less hard about our bodies altogether and open up to everything else that life has to offer, because there's so much else out there.
Yeah. I mean, that is one of your first exercises too, is like really taking a look at like the mental mind space that all dieting has taken from you. And that was profound, because I think it really was literally when I stopped thinking about it altogether, I was like, oh my gosh, I have so much more brain space. I mean, it's kind of when I actually started my sort of building my own online platform, because I was like, oh my gosh, I have so much more time to do creative things. Like I got my creative mojo back and, I started writing more and hobbies that I enjoyed doing. And because it's so easy when you're in it to get in it, like I have to be the health coach and I have to be the personal trainer, like thinking that all of your goals in life have to be about food and your body. And it's just, it doesn't have to be that way.
Right. I know there's so much more to life, and food and your body don't have to be your only hobbies.
Yeah.
Or your hobbies at all.
Or exactly. Like just make a resolution that doesn't have anything to do with food and your body, please.
I love it.
You don't really have control over it anyway.
Right. Yes, I know. That's the most radical resolution of all, I think, is like to resolve not to try to influence your food and your body, but just like take it off the table for now.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love it. Well, this was so delightful talking with you. I could talk with you for another hour and a half, but we're running low on time. So Tell us more where people can find you and learn more about your work.
Yeah. So my website is probably the best place to find me, StefaniReinoldMD.com, and you'll be redirected to kind of all my goodies. I have a book coming out actually this spring. If you're interested in more of the emotional stuff beyond food, I know that was kind of a big part of my experience through postpartum depression and motherhood and my disordered eating. And you can get all that information on my website. And probably my biggest platform I really like hanging out is on Instagram. So you can find me, Stefani Reinold, MD, on there too.
That's awesome. Thank you. We'll share all of that in the show notes for this episode. And it's been such a joy talking with you. I'm really glad we made it happen.
Yeah, thank you.
So that's our show and our last episode of 2017. Thanks again so much to Stefani Reinold for joining us on this episode, and thanks to you for listening. If you've gotten something out of this podcast, please help us reach more people who need to hear the anti-diet message, which is like everyone, especially this time of year, by sharing this episode on Apple Podcasts or iTunes or your favorite podcast platform. Sharing on one of the Apple platforms helps bring us up higher in the podcast rankings, and that helps more people discover us so that we can continue to drown out the pro-diet messages that are in the health category right now and keep rising up. I'd love to be in the top 20 or the top 10. You know, right now we're in the top 100 and frequently the top 50, which is amazing. But I'd love to be even higher in those rankings to bring the anti-diet movement to an even bigger audience. So consider it your holiday gift to me to help spread the word about the podcast and help me out with this. You can also leave us a nice rating and review in your podcast provider of choice, which is another way to help new listeners discover us and is always so appreciated. If you're ready for a deeper dive into all things anti-diet, you can join my Intuitive Eating Fundamentals course, which is the one that Stefani and I were just talking about. It'll help you make peace with food and your body and give up dieting for good. Learn more and sign up for the course at christyharrison.com/course. That's christyharrison.com/course. To get full show notes from this episode, including all the resources we discussed, head over to christyharrison.com/136. That's christyharrison.com/136. And thanks so much to everyone who helps make Food Psych possible. Our editor and engineer at Podcast Fast Track, our administrative and community manager, Ashley Saruya, Abby Moore Photography for shooting the lovely photo for our album art, and Meredith Noble for designing that album art with our logo and info. And the music you're hearing behind me now is by a band called AWOL, and the track is called Food, used under the Creative Commons license. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, which will be January 1st, 2018, y'all, stay psyched.
Stupid or scared, no work in the kitchen now. Who put you there in that perfect position now? Bullies want your food, and you ain't really beef.